Welcome to the tutorial over 4.2 Solving Quadratic Equations by Graphing. Your new vocabulary today is quadratic equation, standard form, root, and zero. Quadratic equations are quadratic functions that are set to equal a value. The standard form for a quadratic equation is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. When you need to actually find the solution to a quadratic equation, you can use what's called the roots of the equation. That's where your function actually crosses the x-axis. They're also called zeros. For first example, we're going to solve x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0 by graphing. When you plug this into your calculator, where it says f of x, equals, all you're going to do is plug in x squared plus 6x plus 8. So x squared plus 6x plus 8. You don't actually put in the equals 0. You can also make a table of values, x and y, kind of like what we did in the last video. And you pick related points. So for instance, we can say -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, so on and so forth, and you get the corresponding y values by plugging into your original equation. Here we get 3, 0, -1, 0, and 3. So we can actually take these points and plot them now. So we'll have one at -5, 3. I have one at -4, 0, -3, -1, -2, 0, -1, 3. We get our nice smooth curve like so. Now, when we actually want to solve this, we want to see where it crosses the x-axis. So this is in 2 points, so the solutions would be x equals -4 and x equals -2. You can always check your solutions by actually plugging back into your original equation. And our original equation was x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. And everywhere we see an x, on the first one we're going to plug in a -4, and on the second one we'll plug in a -2. And when you actually plug these into your calculator, you do get 0 equals 0 and 0 equals 0. So these are indeed our two solutions, x equals -4 and x equals -2. You always want to plug back in because sometimes you might not get an answer that's correct. Alright, so there's different types of solutions. Where your quadratic actually just touches the x-axis once, you have one real solution. When it's actually below or above and it crosses twice, you have two real solutions. And when your parabola never crosses the x-axis, you will have no solution. Alright, so example 2. We have solve x squared minus 4x equals -4 by graphing. Before we can do anything, we actually need all the terms to one side, and it has to be equal to 0. So we're going to take my -4 and move it to the other side. And we're going to get x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Now you can actually take this and plug it into your calculator, and you go to the graph, and then you plug in, and it'll say f of x equals, and then you plug in all of this, but you do not plug in the equal 0. Another option, you can actually make a table of values. So here's my table of values, and what we'll do is we will actually graph this. And the way I got these values, I just picked random x values, and then I plugged them into my original equation to get my y values. So now let's graph our points. 0, 4, 1, 1, 2, 0, 3, 1, and 4, 4. And we can see that our parabola only touches the x-axis once, so we know that our solution is at 2, 0. And of course you can plug it back into your original equation. Everywhere you see an x, you will actually plug in a 2. And when you actually solve that out, you do indeed get 0 equals 0. So in this case, we only have one real solution. We don't have two. The max you'll have is 2. Next example, we're going to use a quadratic equation to find two numbers with a sum of 4 and a product of 5. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is let x be one of the numbers. And since we know that one of the numbers is x and they have to add up to 4, we can actually get the other number by saying 4 minus x, and that'll give us the other number. And we know that the product of these two things need to equal 5. So if I take x, which is one of my numbers, and I take 4 minus x and multiply it, this product is going to equal 5. Okay, so before I can do anything, I actually need to go ahead and get everything to one side and distribute and get it in standard form. When I distribute my x, I get 4x minus x squared equals 5. Alright, now I need to move this 5 to the other side, so I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. And I get 4x minus x squared minus 5 equals 0. The only problem is, this is not in the correct order. The x squared term has to be first. Okay, so we're going to move that to the front, and we're going to get negative x squared plus 4x minus 5 equals 0. Now this is the equation I can actually work with. Now what you can do is to see if this is even possible, you can graph this. So of course go to graph on your calculator, put in your f of x, make sure you do not put the equals 0, and you should get a graph like this. Now what this means is since we do not have this function crossing the x-axis at all, and what that means is that there's no solution. There's no possible way that we can get two numbers with a sum of 4 and they're going to be a product of 5. And you can actually plug and chug and you can try to see if you can do it, but there's no possibility of doing it. So this one is no solution. Example 4. We're going to estimate roots. Solve negative x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0 by graphing. If the exact roots cannot be found, state the consecutive integers between which the roots are located. Okay, so again, you can go to your calculator and you can just graph it in f of x equals negative x plus 4x minus 1, and you do not put the equals 0. If you were to get a table of values, you could just choose some random x numbers, plug them into your original equation, and get your y values. Now, you should get a graph that looks like this. And if you take a look at your calculator, you see that we actually don't have pretty points where they cross the x-axis. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at what two numbers they are between. So in this case, we have one root between 0 and 1, and then we have another root between 3 and 4. And that's how you would write your answer. Example number 5. We're going to solve by using a table. Solve x squared plus 5x minus 7 equals 0. What you can do is you can go and plug this into your calculator, and when you graph it, you'll see that you won't get an actual pretty point where it crosses the x-axis. So, for those of you using an 84, these are what these directions are for. Those of you using the Inspire, the buttons are a little different, but you're still going to go to the table. Okay, so where you enter your f of x, it's x squared plus 5x minus 7. And then you're going to go to the table window and find where your function actually changes signs. That means it either goes from positive to negative or negative to positive. You're actually going to change the table. You notice that you have integers on your table. You want to change the table to 0.01 and look again for the sign change. And you keep doing this process until you get a more accurate location of the 0. Okay, so what that actually looks like at each of those steps is here. So here we have our table, and we just have our integers. When we change it to the 0.01, our answer should look like this, and when you actually change the table set to 0.001 to get a more accurate location, you see here we go from a negative up here to a positive down here, so this is a good location of where the 0 is actually going to be. and so that this one solution is approximately 1.140. For our last example, I'm going to do a word problem. The highest bridge in the United States is the Royal George Bridge in Colorado. The deck of the bridge is 1,053 feet above the river. Suppose a marble is dropped over the railing from a height of 3 feet above the bridge deck. How long will it take for the marble to reach the surface of the water, assuming that there is no air resistance? Use the formula h of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus h naught, where t is the time in seconds and h naught is the initial height above the water in feet. Alright, so first things first, we need to find t when h naught is 1056 and when h of t is equal to 0. So first we actually plug in h naught as 1056 and we set the equation equal to 0. So you need to graph the related function and use a graphing calculator. Make sure you actually adjust your window so that way you can see the numbers. Usually in standard form it goes from negative 10 to 10, and notice we are in the thousands. Okay, so in the way you do that, you go to menu and you should see something about window, edit, something like that, and you should go in there and play with your numbers and to where you can see your graph. Once you graph your function, you're going to use the 0 feature. So you're going to go to menu, go to analyze graph, and click number 1 where it says 0. On this one you have to do that highlight feature where you get on one side of the 0 and on the other and highlight it, and then you should be able to press enter and it will give you your actual point. And your answer should look a little bit like this. You should be able to get your graph to where you have a 0 at 8. And if you think about this, you want to make sure that you don't look at this part of your graph, because if you think of height, we actually can't be negative. So we only need the first quadrant here, so we need this 1 0 here. And that's the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching.